Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled Modern Power Dynamics. And in this particular episode, we're focusing on the USA and the UK. Episode 151. I will be exploring some interesting thoughts about power dynamics and the motivations of wealthy elites or oligarchs in global politics, and concerns about the concentration of power and whether those with significant wealth and influence are acting in ways that benefit the broader population or primarily themselves. Throughout this podcast, I will touch upon from time to time some of the points I made last week, including several concerns about the concentration of power, the treatment of workers, and what I see as troubling trends in how society is developing. Remember I mentioned that quote by Jeff Bezos, an alleged quote about wanting his employees to fear him. Such management philosophies can certainly create toxic work environments and reflect problematic power dynamics. The rapid job cuts that we've seen at various companies, including Elon Musk's enterprises, have indeed created significant hardship for many workers. The speed and manner of these cuts often leave employees with little warning or preparation. My anxieties about healthcare, particularly as an elderly person, reflect real challenges many face in accessing quality care. The concerns about incentives in healthcare systems potentially working against patient interests, I think are valid issues that deserve attention. I also mentioned last week about connections between media narratives, political strategies, and power dynamics, but I see them, and I'm not alone, as being deliberately divisive. The observation about tabloid media creating antagonism between different groups while distracting from political agendas is very, very real. Certainly very real in the UK. Some sociologists would call that activity divide and conquer, keeping populations focused on conflicts with each other rather than the questioning of those in power. This creates a fertile ground for scapegoating immigrants and minorities when economic or social problems arise. All the points that I will discuss today, and also in the next 3 or 4 podcasts, I did mention last week that I wanted to use history as a way of running parallel to what's going on now. And in terms of history, because history repeats itself, there are things that we can learn from history and how we tackled particular issues as they arose. And if you recall, the 4 areas in terms of history that I will be using for the next few weeks, which I said will be used as a parallel sort of comparison between activity now in the USA and the United Kingdom. And the 4 areas that I will be using as, I said, for comparison is 1. The Gilded Age, 1870s to the 1900s, and its robber barons compared to today's tech billionaires. Post-World War II, consolidation of media ownership and today's social media platforms. Historical labour movements and their successes or failures against corporate power. And the final bullet point that I'll be using, historical analysis, the fail of democratic systems in the 1930s Europe through economic instability and elite accommodation. And before we sort of get into the real nitty-gritty of today's podcast, this particular paragraph was used last week, and it was also part of one of the slides, and I think it's worth repeating again before we embark on this week's podcast activity. Throughout history, political systems have evolved, reflecting the values and structures of their societies. One intriguing system is oligarchy, where power rests in the hands of a small group of elite individuals, often drawn from noble families or wealthy members of society. This concentration of power raises questions about governance, equity, and representation. Oligarchies can shape a nation's policies and direction, often prioritizing the interests of a select few over the broader population. Understanding this political framework is essential for grasping the dynamics of power and influence that persist in various cultures today. As we explore the characteristics and implications of oligarchies, it becomes clear how they continue to impact modern governance. A heading: which political system is run by a group of noble families or wealthy members of society? Various political systems shape governance and societal organisation. Each system addresses power distribution and the role of citizens in decision-making processes. Understanding these systems provides context for oligarchy, emphasising its unique characteristics. 1. Democracy. A system where power lies with the people, often exercised through elected representatives. Democratic societies encourage participation, accountability, and transparency. And as we go through all of these examples and bullet points for various paragraphs coming up, think of what's going on right now in the USA and most definitely in the UK as well. 2. Monarchy. A political system led by a single ruler, such as a king or queen. Monarchies can be absolute, where the monarch holds complete authority, or constitutional, where the monarch's powers are limited by law. 3. Authoritarianism. A system characterized by strong central power and limited political freedoms. Decision-making often resides with a single entity or a small group, with citizens having minimal influence. Theocracy. A political system where religious leaders govern and laws are based on religious principles. This system intertwines religious authority with state control. Oligarchy, a system where a small group, typically from elite classes such as noble families or wealthy individuals, hold power. Governance emphasizes the interests of the ruling class, often at the expense of broader representation. Totalitarianism, an extreme form of authoritarianism where the state seeks to control all aspects of public and private life. It involves a single ruling party, extensive surveillance, and suppression of dissent. Understanding these various political systems illuminates the dynamics of power and influence. Each system's strengths and weaknesses offer insights into how governance can impact societal outcomes. Aristocracy refers to a political system where power resides with a small group of noble families or affluent individuals. Understanding its historical context and characteristics is essential to grasp its role in governance. So let's have a look at historical context. Historically, aristocracies emerged in various cultures, often alongside monarchies. They played a critical role in feudal systems where land ownership and hereditary titles dictated power dynamics. Ancient Greece and Rome exemplified aristocratic governance, with wealthy elites influencing political decisions. In Europe, during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, aristocratic families maintained significant control over land and resources, shaping laws and social norms. These structured facilitated alliances through marriage and territorial conquests, reinforcing their influence. What are the characteristics of aristocracy? Aristocracies exhibit distinct characteristics that define their governance structure. Heredity. Power typically passes through family lines, maintaining control within a select group. Wealth concentration. Economic resources are concentrated among the elite, enabling influence over political and social spheres. Limited participation. Decision-making often excludes the wider populace, with governance largely confined to the aristocrats. Privilege. Members enjoy special rights and social status, leading to disparities in access to power and resources. Political alliances. Aristocrats frequently form coalitions to strengthen their positions, influencing legislation and policy. These characteristics demonstrate how aristocracy functions as a governing system, impacting equity and representation within society. Oligarchy in modern society prevails in various forms within modern governance, illustrating the concentration of power among a select few. Understanding its dynamics reveals a profound impact on society. Comparisons with aristocracy. Oligarchy and aristocracy share similarities in power structure, yet differ significantly in context and operation. Noble lineage. Aristocracy emphasizes heredity, where power is inherited through noble families. Oligarchies, while also elite, may not strictly rely on noble ancestry. Economic power. Oligarchies often arise from wealth concentration, where affluent individuals exert influence regardless of noble lineage. Aristocratic power, however, typically revolves around traditional titles and privileges. Participation. Aristocracy limits political participation to select families, whereas oligarchies might include wealthy elites from diverse backgrounds, potentially widening the circle of influence. Governance style. Oligarchies can adapt to modern times, utilizing economic resources to influence political decisions. Aristocracy often remains more rigid, adhering to historical structures. Influential oligarchs. There's a small section of bullet points here, but more details in the accompanying article, and also the reference sources for you to look up more details, should you so wish, on these groups of people and their activities. Influential oligarchs shape governance and society through their significant economic and political power. Political influence. Wealthy individuals often finance political campaigns, manipulative political agendas to favour their interests. Corporate power. Leaders of major corporations may hold oligarchical power, significantly impacting market dynamics and public policy. Media dominance. Control over media outlets allows oligarchs to influence public opinion and shape narratives, enhancing their political clout. Do you recognise these bullet points? I certainly do. Global reach. Many oligarchs operate on a global scale, impacting international relations and economics through investments and lobbying efforts. Societal impact. Their decisions often prioritize profit, impacting social equity and public welfare, reinforcing the disparity between the elite and the general population. Case studies of aristocratic systems. Just some examples here to bring, if you like, this theory to life. Aristocratic systems have historically played important roles in shaping governance structures across various societies. This section highlights both historical and contemporary examples of such systems. Historical examples. 1. Ancient Greece. In ancient Athens, a small group of aristocrats held significant influence over political decisions. Families like the Achaemenids and the Pisistratides wielded power and manipulated important affairs, often suppressing popular dissent while promoting their own interests. 2. Roman Republic. The Roman Senate composed primarily of patrician families, served as a governing body with substantial authority. These noble families dictated policies, controlled resources, and shaped legislation, reinforcing the elite's dominance over the plebeians. 3. Feudal Europe. Throughout medieval Europe, feudalism established a societal structure dominated by nobility. Kings granted land to aristocratic families, who in return pledged loyalty and military support. This system concentrated power within a few familial lines, dictating the political landscapes for centuries. So many activities, behaviours definitely apply to the UK and the USA in recent times. United Kingdom. The British peerage system reflects modern aristocracy, where hereditary nobility still exists. Members of the House of Lords, including life peers and hereditary peers, partake in legislative processes, and in so doing, influencing policies and governance despite diminished formal power. 2. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia exemplifies a contemporary aristocracy where a small group of wealthy royal families governs. The Al Saud family controls significant political, economic and social power, reinforcing a system where wealth and nobility maintain authority. 3. Russia. Post-Soviet Russia reveals an oligarchic structure with a concentration of power among wealthy individuals. Business magnates such as Roman Abramovich emerged from this environment, shaping politics and economics while resembling aristocratic influence over governance. Benefits and drawbacks of aristocratic systems. Aristocratic systems present both advantages and disadvantages, influencing governance and societal dynamics. Benefits. Stability. Aristocracies often provide political stability through established power structures. Noble families maintain continuity in leadership, lessening abrupt changes that can disrupt society. Experience. Wealthy and noble members typically possess extensive political experience and knowledge, contributing to informed decision-making. Long-term planning. Aristocratic leaders often focus on long-term goals, prioritizing sustainable policies over immediate gains. Their wealth enables investment in infrastructure and services. Cultural patronage. Noble families frequently support arts and culture, fostering a rich cultural landscape. This patronage enhances society's cultural heritage. Inequity. Aristocracies reinforce social stratification, concentrating power among elites. This system minimizes the voice and needs of the general population. Limited representation. Aristocratic governance often excludes broader participation, resulting in misrepresentation of societal interests and neglect of diverse perspectives. Corruption risks. Concentrated power can lead to corruption, as elites may prioritise personal interests over public welfare. This undermines trust in governance. Resistance to change. Aristocracies might resist progressive reforms, favouring traditional values. This resistance can hinder social advancement and innovation. Everything in those last few bullet points, for definite, exist in the UK monarchy system. Aristocratic systems display complex dynamics, reflecting both the benefits inherent to experienced leadership and stability and the drawbacks of inequality and limited representation. The exploration of oligarchies and aristocrats reveal the intricate interplay of power and privilege in governance. Both systems demonstrate how concentrated wealth and noble lineage can shape political landscapes. While they can offer stability and experience, they also risk perpetuating inequality and limiting broader participation. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for recognising the implications on modern societies. The influence of elite groups continues to be a significant factor in shaping policies and societal outcomes. As the world evolves, awareness of these systems will play a vital role in addressing the challenges of governance and promoting equitable representation. With those explanations and examples and descriptions of various forms of power and influence and the outcomes of such decisions, I'm going to now, for this last third of the podcast, to give some real-life examples. And the examples will be divided up into around half a dozen areas. And then I will go into, as I said, real-life actions that have taken place in the USA or the UK or both. So, for the remainder of this podcast, I said we'll be looking at real examples now, and it will cover generally 4 areas. And what I don't cover in detail, well, none of them are going to be in fine detail, but there'll be some things that I don't cover at all in this video podcast, but there will be information in the accompanying article. So over the 4 headings, we will be hoping to cover and understand between this podcast and the article and reference sources should you wish to research further. We'll be looking at corporate influence in the USA political system, campaigns, finance and lobbying. We will have, hopefully, a better understanding once we have researched a little bit more, but the main headings will appear both here and in the article. UK's revolving door between government and the private sector. The role of think tanks and policy institutes in shaping legislation. They definitely exist in the UK, and all of them generally stay in the background in the UK, Sometimes you'll hear names dropped, but generally it's almost like the unspoken word or unspoken secret, but they exist. In the USA, in terms of think tanks, they're quite bold about it. And one of them, in particular, who's very bold and has no problem whatsoever in telling everybody about it, and that's the Heritage Foundation. I don't need to say very much more on that. I did a podcast on them about 12 months ago, and at the end of it I did say to the listeners and viewers that the Heritage Foundation will become very well known, as they definitely have now over those 12 months, because they are very, very determined, very thorough, highly qualified and experienced, and very serious. And their aims and objectives are very long term. They're not looking to change things overnight. They are definitely sort of sowing seeds and building and growing on those, that by the time people get to really hear about them, which is what's happening now, but they've been going quite a few years, couple of decades at least, if not more, because they were very heavily intertwined with Margaret Thatcher in the Tory party in the UK. And to this day, there are media individuals that go back and forth doing work for and giving speeches to, and vice versa them. So that one, when I saw some of the paragraphs around it, I just put the heading, because they're imprinted on my brain and have been, as I said, for over a year now. And they are very, very powerful, very dangerous, and very determined. That's all I'm going to say on that. I don't live in the USA, but for those that do, be very, very mindful of that organisation. And you probably, well, you do know more about it than I do. But just want to remind USA friends, there are a number of think tanks, so it's not just the Heritage Foundation, but that came to mind because they've been in this for decades. Certainly between 2 and 3 decades that I know of. They mean business, and they don't mess around, and they're very, very thorough, and as I said, dangerous. And if you know of Project 25, in that bullet point it says that they're involved in shaping legislation. That is an understatement. It's fact, but it's an understatement. It's so much goes into those words of shaping legislation. If you read Project 25, you'll come away fully understanding why I say be aware of them. Specific examples: tech billionaires growing political influence, rapid workforce reductions. We definitely, both in the USA and the UK, are seeing that. The difference is that in the USA, people are just told basically on that day and they're out the door the same day. The UK is doing that, reducing jobs in many areas, but they're supposedly playing by the books, so it takes a little bit longer. But there is a reduction, definitely. It's slightly... they will try and come across as being more polite and caring. They're not. They're not. I know it's the Labour Party, but they're not. They're equally cold, cruel, vindictive, and they are, in my opinion, and I'll say it's my opinion, working to and for a small group of people who are powerful and affluent and who exert influence. Very much like what's going on in the USA at the moment. So, giving some real-life examples that you will be able to look up and read about, and it will give a better understanding of this power and influence with the USA and the UK. How power is consolidated in modern political systems and the intersection of government and corporate interests. 1. Corporate influence in US politics. The rise of super PACs, PACs, and dark money in elections following Citizens United 2010. And for those of you that didn't know, like I didn't, what a super PAC was, it is an independent, expenditure-only political action committee, or committees. There are quite a number of them around, better known as super PACs. They are a type of political action committee in the United States. How lobbying shapes legislation in favour of major industries such as pharmaceuticals, tech, and finance. Case studies: ExxonMobil influencing climate policy. Big Pharma lobbying against drug price caps. Historical parallel: the Gilded Age's industrial magnates, monopolies, and their grip on US governance. 2. The UK's revolving door between government and the private sector. The movement of politicians into corporate boardrooms after leaving office. Notable examples: David Cameron and Greensill Capital scandal. Former ministers lobbying for corporations. How media and financial elites maintain control over policymaking. Comparisons with the past: the influence of the East India Company directors in Parliament in the 18th century. 3. Think tanks and policy institutes shaping legislation. The role of groups like the Heritage Foundation in the USA and the Policy Exchange in the UK in writing government policy. Like I said, think of Project 25. In terms of the UK, they're more secretive about it, but trust me, it's going on exactly the same way. How billionaires funding influences independent research and narrative setting. Past precedent: post-World War II institutions like the Council on Foreign Relations influencing US foreign policy. Tech billionaires growing political influence and workforce reductions. Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, power beyond business, shaping political landscapes. The automation versus employment crisis. How AI and job cuts mirror industrial shifts of the 1800s. Is philanthrocapitalism just soft power expansion? Bill Gates, OpenAI, and soft imperialism. A quick summary to bring the various themes together and to bring this podcast to a close. So today, we looked into how modern power operates in the USA and UK. And if you've ever wondered why corporate interests seem to shape every major policy decision, or why government officials mysteriously land lucrative jobs in the private sector, the massive influence of corporate money in US politics, how UK officials seamlessly transition from public office to private lobbying, the role of think tanks in quietly and how it quietly is shaping our laws, and modern parallels to historical eras like the Gilded Age and its infamous robber barons. You will see by the end of this podcast, and certainly when you look at the article or pursue any of those reference sources over the coming months, you'll see that history has a way of repeating itself. And knowing the past can help us shape the future. If this topic resonates with you, make sure to subscribe and share this episode to those that you feel may be interested. I, for one, would love to, I do hear from many of you as it is, but I would love to hear even more from a wide group of people, particularly those new to finding out about such things, and hear what their thoughts are, because it helps me anyway put together themes and topics for future consideration in future podcast episodes. Second area of summary: corporate influence in US politics. The main talking points: the Citizens United ruling 2010, and how it allowed unlimited corporate spending in elections. Lobbying power: corporations writing legislation for lawmakers. For example, big pharmaceuticals, tech, and Wall Street. And the role of super PACs in shaping political narratives. And a case study for any of you that want to look further into this: the oil and gas industry funding climate denial policies despite public demand for green solutions. That'll be quite interesting. And for an historical parallel with that, as I said, I'm trying to give examples of what's going on now or has been happening recently, and looking back at history where anything similar has taken place and what were the actions that followed it. Was it things that we want to follow, or is it something that we want to avoid and work in a different way? So the historical parallel to that oil and gas industry activity is the Gilded Age, from the 1870s to the 1900s, and the rise of robber barons, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Carnegie, as examples, who controlled politics much like today's tech billionaires. Our third area of summary: the UK's revolving door between government and private sector, and the main talking points from what we've gone through this morning: politicians transitioning seamlessly, into high-paid corporate roles after leaving office. David Cameron and Greensill Capital scandal. A former Prime Minister lobbying for a collapsed financial firm. How private sector ties influence public policy and decisions. The historical parallel with that is the East India Company's unchecked influence in Parliament in the 1700s, and how private businesses controlled colonial expansion, similar to how modern corporations dictate trade policies. The fourth area of summary, the role of think tanks, like the Heritage Foundation, and policy institutes, and the main discussion points around that theme. Organisations like the Heritage Foundation in the USA and the Policy Exchange in the UK dictating public discourse. Who funds them? How independent are they really? A case study, UK austerity policies, media and think tanks justifying economic cuts despite public harm. I can't put into words how that, because it's ongoing within the UK at the moment, from supposedly a Labour government. They couldn't be more vicious if they tried. And the kind of cuts, it's very true, the kind of reductions that they're making and taking assistance, various grants away from elderly, disabled people, veterans. There's just, the list goes on. The list of all of those groups were people that were deemed untouchable. They'd done their part for country over decades, and now at their time in life where, for a variety of reasons, some are less abled because of doing their duty for country, and others, just illness has just taken over and they are suffering and had some assistance by government in the past, and currently that is not the case. Money is being diverted to areas which one could consider to be comfortable. Very similar to what's going on in the USA now. The historical parallels for this theme is post-World War II media consolidation, governments aligning with corporate-owned media to control the narratives. Yeah, that's definitely being repeated at the moment in the UK. How Cold War institutions shaped political ideology. A question here in one of the papers, documents, reports that I looked at to put the podcast together. A question was asked by one. Many people assume think tanks are neutral, but if a billionaire funds it, is it really independent? What do you think? Our final theme that we've covered in this podcast relates to tech billionaires and workforce disruption. The main talking points: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, billionaire CEOs influencing policy decisions. Mass layoffs despite record profits. The rise of automation and its impact on workers. AI replacing jobs. Historical comparisons to the Luddite movement in the early 1800s. Historical parallel. The Industrial Revolution. How automation wiped out artisan labour, creating class divides. And it's a discussion point here. Do you think the government should regulate AI to prevent job displacement, or is automation just an inevitable part of progress? And to bring this podcast to a close, we've covered a lot in this podcast, and believe me, it is just an overview. There's more detail, as I said, in the article, but even that is still an overview of what's out there. So if any of this resonates with any of you, you may, over the coming months and years, wish to look into the history behind these activities and groups and individuals, because, as we've said, history repeats itself, and we need to learn from what worked and what didn't in historical examples. So in terms of what we've covered, we've looked at, we've gone from corporate lobbying to the media's role as shaping policy. But history teaches us one thing: power never gives up control willingly. It's up to an informed public to push back. And that's the end of this week's podcast. I look forward, as usual, to reading your comments and to discussing on various social media platforms your thoughts. This is not going to go away, and it's not just America and the UK. I've just chosen those because one, I was born in the one country, and the other I've got family in. But it's happening, it's springing up in different parts around the world. And if I have a fear at all, I do have a number, but if I have an overriding fear, is that because these kind of activities and groups are springing up in different countries, and the power is being controlled by a small group in each of those countries, it's not too far a stretch to see that there are common themes that will apply to all of those groups. Not everything, but they will have some things in common. And should these powerful people, for want, I'm being kind, but for want of a better phrase for them, if they come together and have joint discussions on some financial aspects, for example, then we really are in hot water. And I don't think it's that far a stretch. It might take a decade or so, but the fact that the USA and the UK is not alone in this, and it's not that far-fetched that some of the people that I've mentioned that are involved in USA and UK politics, it's not impossible for them to have discussions like that with like-minded billionaires that are operating elsewhere. So, food for thought. Like I said, I look forward to your comments, and I look forward to speaking with you all next week on our third theme. So thank you very much. I hope it has been of interest somewhere along the way, and that you found some discussion points to have with other people outside of this forum. So, it's bye from me. Bye from Ivy. Bye.